mode.
Good morning and welcome to the fourth in a series of educational workshops, webinars designed for grazing educators in the upper Midwest. My name is Warren King, and again I'd like to welcome you to our webinar this morning. My cohort, or my colleague Jane Jewett, research fellow at the University of Minnesota. Jane is with the Greenland's Blue Waters Initiative. Myself, I am the co-manager of the Pasture project, do consulting work in food and agriculture, the development of regional and local food systems that focus on improving our water quality, and the quality of our soils. Slide. I want to introduce Jeff Farbman. Jeff is kind of piloting our webinar this morning and has got some direction on the technology involved. Jeff?
Thanks, Warren. Sure. Just a quick orientation. You see our presentation over here on the left, and the control panel is on the right. Sometimes the software will collapse the control panel. It's way over on the right. If you click the little orange arrow button, it will expand the control panel, and it might be useful for you to keep that visible. If you go to the View menu and select the Auto Hide the Control Panel, it will remove that check mark, and then it won't collapse anymore. You might want it visible so that you can enter your questions. Now, there are two ways to interact with this webinar today. You can either write your questions, type your questions in the questions box. This is good for either simple questions, or if you don't have a mic or prefer not to speak, and it does help if you specify to whom you're addressing your question, if that's relevant. The other way is you can raise your hand. So also over there, hanging on the left side of the control panel area, there is a raise hand button. So if you do have a mic, raise your hand and I'll go ahead and unmute you, and you can interact directly by speaking with our panelists. The other thing, I don't have a slide for this, but the other thing I wanted to mention is there is one handout associated with this webinar. It's a list of links that will be mentioned throughout this presentation. So also, again, in that webinar control panel, there is a handouts module, and you can go ahead and click on the handout and it should download to your computer. Finally, we will be presenting you with a post-webinar survey. Should open right after the webinar ends, but it will be emailed out to you, a link to it as well. And really, these surveys help us to improve our webinars, our outreach, and make sure they are optimized for your needs. Back to you, Jane.
Okay, hi. Sorry, I had to take the mute off there. All right, so if I can advance this slide. I mean, we all like looking at cows. There we go. So the sponsors of this webinar series are Greenland's Blue Waters and the Greenland's Blue Waters. It's the Midwest Perennial Forage Working Group that has spearheaded this webinar series within that organization. We realized we had some
Jane, are you still with us? We lost your audio.
Yeah, I think, well, I can take over here.
Yeah.
Jeff, while Jane is getting her audio back. So as Jane mentioned, the Greenland's Blue Waters, the Perennial Pasture and Forage Working Group, along with the Pasture Project. And in our conversations, we certainly discovered that we've got some overlapping goals, particularly accelerating the transition to sustainable farm production, which hopefully will improve the environmental performance of farming, improving water quality. Specifically, the Pasture project is looking at to expand grass-based livestock production, and we need an increase in perennial forage and pasture to be able to do that. Slide. So why are we focusing on grazing educators? Well, the upper Midwest is a very unique geography, and typically, as all of you know, the practice has been to graze for 6 months out of the year during the flush of grass and to feed indoors, and it's during the wintertime, and it's a very unique geography and has its own unique challenges and opportunities. Also in grazing education, there are fewer opportunities for professional development, and we're hoping that you all see this as one of those opportunities for professional development, not only to ask questions but to give your input. Around livestock, we certainly see a larger interest from landowners and conservationists in looking at the benefits of livestock, and I'll put in a plug for next month's webinar. We'll be on the benefits of conservation grazing, so you might want to look for that and sign up for that as well. And we're also seeing a lot more consumers who want pasture-raised meats and dairy, and in most regions of the country, the bottleneck seems to be supply. There are other issues, but certainly supply and getting more farmers onto the land and more young farmers interested in livestock production is key. And I think today's webinar you'll really appreciate, because we have actually farmers on, family farmers, and I think one of their things they'll talk about are the opportunities and challenges of getting their own children interested and participating in the business. Slide. So what could we achieve with a network of grazing educators? Well, certainly the connections that we're all making in the upper Midwest. I think, you know, building this collaboration from the bottom up as opposed to the top down is very key. There's an opportunity too for us to create a platform to house and access materials and tools, and I think the handout you have today is an example of that. And then in my mind, one of the real key things is to work together to establish a set of basic principles that can be taught kind of at all levels, and what is managed grazing, rotational grazing, good grazing, if you will, all about. Slide. So the format for today's webinar. So we have basically 3 presenters today, and they're going to share some of their experience and insights on this particular topic of integrating livestock into cropping systems. You know, you're encouraged to do the same. This is hopefully a two-way street. We want to benefit, and everybody in the call benefit from your experience and your insights. So please, if you feel like speaking, raise your hand. There's several of us who are looking for that, to, if you want to speak or to type your questions in, we'll get your questions in. We're going to work to direct traffic, Jeff and Jane and I, and keep the discussion moving. And again, as Jeff said, there is a brief survey at the end of the webinar, and it's very helpful for us to give us direction, and we appreciate your feedback. And once again, I'd like to point out that if you click in your control panel on that handout button, there is one handout in which you can download today, and I think it's valuable because it provides a lot of links and references to the information that is being presented today. Slide. So I'd like to introduce Joe Sellers. Joe is an Extension B specialist with ISU. He's been there since 1987 and is focused on grazing in both beef and sheep management systems in southern Iowa. His contributions have been recognized by the state, the county, and the national level, and he also serves on the board of directors of the Iowa Forage and Grasslands Council and the South Central Iowa Area Partnership. Joe has degrees in animal science, ag education, and studies from Iowa State University. So Joe, I welcome you as a lead presenter here today, and please take it away.
Okay, thank you very much, Warren. Yeah, we're going to have a nice discussion today, I think, and I invited Duane and Jodi Steenhoek to come and join me today because of some of the things they're doing on their farm. I think is very relevant to producers around the state. And Duane and Jodi will introduce them a little bit later, but I've worked with them for several years. None of us want to remember how long, probably. So we've been here a while, and so we've been here kind of in the same area, and we go through some of the same things. My background, of course, is working a lot with cattle and sheep, like we mentioned, and working with farmers, and I work in central and south central Iowa. And historically, we've always had a lot of pasture and row crops as a combination. I mean, that's been the base of Midwest agriculture for many generations. But it's changed, and certainly it's changed to being more specialized, and there's been some outcomes or some results of that, some such specialization that's an issue. So, one of the things is, where's all that pasture gone? I mean, we've had a lot more pasture in the past. If you look at Iowa, especially between about 1974 and 1980, before the farm crisis, there probably was about 3.5 million acres of what we would call rotational pasture that was part of a cropping system. So it was basically forage that could have been farmed, but it was mostly in pasture. Now what's happened, and so since that time, and even later, after the farm crisis, we got bounced up to where we had over 1 million beef cows in Iowa, and now we've got under 900,000, or right around 900,000, and that's probably growing a little bit. Definitely nationally, the cow herd's growing, and it is growing some, but we've got less cows, and I'm just talking primarily about beef cows. But we also especially have a lot more of that, less of that croppable pasture. So between 1997 and 2012, we lost 2 million acres of what you would call croppable pastures. That would be pasture that a lot of us would say should have been rotational acres, that maybe were 6-year rotations or even multiple year rotations and got farmed occasionally. Now a lot of that's getting farmed almost exclusively, and that's the change of what's going on with our system. And then also in the Midwest, and I appreciate that Robert and Warren found some more information, that certainly there's also an expansion of more cropland. Iowa's got some of this, but also these others. The land that had never been cropped or wasn't even considered cropland expanded some by us having really high corn and soybean prices and generating interest in putting more land in that use. The same with all these other states, having changes in what's going on with the amount of croppable land, more land being incropped, and nationwide grasslands account for 77% of all cropland conversions. So stuff that was converted from what was always in forage or primarily in forage to cropland, most of that is row crops. Certainly in our area, we've also had changes of stuff that normally was grasslands that were grazed that have been changed to recreational uses, and that's been another issue. That's reduced the amount of pasture and hay that's been available. But as a whole, the last, especially 10 years, most of it's been based on conversion to row crops. And then this looks at a different chart that Laura Payne put together for our perennial forage working group, looking at all 3 states. And obviously what we've shown you earlier, Iowa was the one with a really dramatic change in that cropland acres. All of them have a reduction, but most of the rest of them started with a lot less. And Iowa started with a lot of that land in 1997, and now we're back down to where we've got about as few acres as anybody as far as land that was farmable pasture acres. So that's changed. And then, historically, our place we live, and this is Jodi and Duane and I, we live right here, and we have land that's on the ridge that's always farmed. It could be always farmed, really, and maybe occasionally you might do something else. You have land on the side hill isn't quite so rough that maybe it's a rotational acres that you'd like to have in hay and then go back to row crop occasionally. And then the really steep stuff we just would keep in pasture. And that's how it's been for many, many years, but now we're getting to the point that all those things are getting farmed as corn and soybeans more and more. So it's different than it was even 10 years ago. So what led to less diversity? I think there's a lot of factors, and you can argue about whether these are the right ones, but these are the ones I thought about. And certainly the farm crisis had an impact because there was a lot of people that were of an age that started farming and when you got really big financial pressure, the only chattel that you really had that was marketable that had much value was the livestock. And so and maybe not as much value as you wanted to have, but it was the easiest thing as far as something to liquidate and pay off debt. So the first thing that came off all the farms was the livestock. And it's hard to get some of that livestock back. The other issue is loss of the generation of basic animal husbandry. So then all of a sudden we had these people, unfortunately, including me, that was in my like 20s and 30s, and then essentially if they stopped doing it, then they didn't translate on to the next generation because they weren't raising livestock anymore. So we had a gap, not only on who's got the livestock, but also on knowledge. And then the commodity programs have really favored row crops because there's a lot more, certainly, safety net underneath corn and soybeans, especially corn, and also more subsidies for insurances on those risk management tools. We have risk management available for livestock, but nowhere near as much subsidy, not as much support. Aging farmer base, and there's a combination of farmers that were at an age when they could get into CRP or something like that and idle land, and maybe it's hard to get back to a pasture use, or also just people that don't want to work with livestock or can't, and don't have another generation to work with livestock. So certainly just the aging of our farmers is reducing how many people maybe can manage cattle. And then it is expensive to capitalize all this stuff. I mean, land's expensive, cattle are expensive, not that easy to capitalize that. And that's one of the reasons why we've always thought that getting more partnerships between people with the land and people with the cattle would be important to try to at least give an entry level into livestock production. So a little bit about what are the impacts of these changes. And this is just looking at example soils in south central Iowa. I'm not going to bore down into that too deep, other than they're just soil mapping units. So we're talking about Shelby and Clarinda soils, and then a lot of our counties have those. And Iowa uses what they call the corn suitability rating to rate the productivity of those soils. So these would be ranked as something like in the low mid-20s to upper mid-40s for corn suitability rating, which means it's not the most productive soil. Then expected corn yields with our more recent ICE-paid tables with CSR2, corn suitability rating 2, then would show that you expect the corn yields to be like from about 117 to 156 or something like that on those kind of soils, an average of a little under 140. So that to me would become an example of some of the soils we're talking about, that normally they would have been in grass or at least in a rotation. Maybe they need to be farmed every 2 years out of 10 to keep things productive, but they wouldn't really be permanently into row crop historically. And then these same kind of soils, then what do you expect for soil loss? Well, if it's no-tilled and cross slope, corn soybean rotation, then the range would be from about 3 tons to 9 tons, depending on which soil you're talking about. And that changes a lot of the kind of rains we've got, because we've had places here that have got 8-inch rains, and even though maybe you had quite a bit of residue, you could easily have 20 tons of soil loss in one event here if you had this really bad rains on the steep ground. And then if it was conservation tillage on these types of soils, then the range would probably be from about 13 to over 26 tons per acre, what you'd expect if you cross slope with conservation tillage. So there's soils that there's really almost no way other than terracing to avoid getting soil loss if you're going to continue to farm those kinds of soils. And then, if we compare that to pasture, and it's obviously you can argue what number you should use for the pasture soil loss, but there's a lot of studies that would show that it should be under a ton, except you don't include gully and, something that's a cattle path thing. Just strictly well-managed forage that has enough residual height should not have very much soil loss. And we've got studies at Iowa State and all kinds of places to show that very little sediment and very little phosphorus will move from a pasture if it's got enough stubble height. So the range on the average of the soils would have been, like I mentioned earlier, probably about 17 tons on the conservation till to about 5 tons on the no-till, and then basically under a ton most likely on the pasture if it was really well managed. So it makes a big difference on soil loss, and that relates also then to nutrient loss. And also the reality is that since we've made all this conversion, the economics have completely flip-flopped too. So, you could argue about this is Joe Seller's economics, and you can notice one of the degrees I have is not in farm management or economics or business management. I don't have an MBA, but simple economics would be if you look at our budgets with the land use analyzer or also with Ag Decision Maker, that these kind of soils are going to have yields that are from like 100 to 140. And then when we do that with the input costs, we've got the return to land. So, we're paying for everything except the land, would be anywhere from a minus 75 to a plus 65. So none of those really will pay for current cash rents. So essentially all of them are losing money at 350 corn, unless we have this, like the great home run one year where we get 200 bushel corn on that kind of thing, or 180. So you wouldn't be planning on getting that, though. You're going to be planning on getting about 120 bushel yields out of this type of soil. And we'll what do you guys think? Duane and Jodi, do you agree with that? That's kind of soil that's at lower productivity. You can't year in and year out expect it to be much more than 120 to 30 bushels probably. Do you agree?
Yeah, no, I would definitely agree with that. Even in the year like this year with the moisture we've had, you know, that
those kind of soils.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, the economics on 350 corn or even $4 corn is not very good. It's probably about $5 corn to really make that pay. And maybe we'll be there, and we have been there. But the other thing then, if you look at just cow-calf production, and these again would be based on your costs, and I want to really caution anybody to take too much from these numbers other than just a basic comparison. That your costs are what you need to put in these budgets, not some costs that somebody in a budgeting program put together. But if it went from like 215 to 255 feeder calf price for 550-pound steers, then my projections would be that we would have had a profitability of about $110 to $170 per acre return to land. And that's assuming about 2.5 acres of pasture per cow. Then if we did that, then basically that would be, we have to pay for rent out of that, but we would still show a profit above what we have for pasture rental rates in Iowa, which pasture rental rates in Iowa are probably about $70 to $100 an acre. So we still would have profitability on all these cases. Now, we're not going to have these prices forever, but, you know, we aren't going to have $7 corn forever. We've proven that. So it shows you that a more balanced approach can at least give you more returns, hopefully, and give you more opportunities. So these all budgets are all things that you can find on Ag Decision Maker, or also on our Land Use Analyzer, which also is at Ag Decision Maker. So Land Use Analyzer is the thing that we're working with, and we spent a lot of time on this. And it really, in Iowa, it ties the soils back to productivity, does projections on the yields, also lets you compare it to different land uses like cow-calf or stockers, and then comes up with the economic impacts and also the environmental impacts. So it'll show the soil loss. It'll also show you what the you can actually input back in the back of it, what the cost of conversion to that would be. So if converting from CRP to land, you have to add terraces. What do you have to add? I mean, if you're going to go to row crop, things like that. So for Iowa, the soils will generate some numbers, but you still can override those what you think the productivity is. So let's say the computer says it's going to be 2.5 acres per cow-calf pair. You can change that to 2, or you can change that to 3 if you think that's more realistic. So in the other states, since the Iowa soils are what are in here, you would use the same tool, but you're the one that's going to have to input those things like corn yield and soybean yield and hay alfalfa yield and livestock production as far as grazing days, and you can do that manually and still use this tool if you'd like to in other states. And this is something we've got to keep working on, and I need to work on getting some more scenarios put together with that. But that's available then also on Ag Decision Maker. William Edwards, who retired from Iowa State recently, did the one that did the work on this. So along with input from NRCS and extension staff and other agribusinesses to come up with this tool. So what's our factors right now that maybe could favor more livestock and crop interaction? You know, I think there's a lot of income potential for livestock no matter what your marketing opportunity is, and we have good markets to access. You know, we have opportunity, and we can spread risk because we have multiple enterprises, and we're not just relying just strictly on corn or soybeans. Added value opportunities and more exports. I mean, certainly we've got expansion in higher marbled or higher end beef that's bringing more, or also more source verified or more background or identified cattle that'll have an impact. And also, like you mentioned earlier, grass-fed beef, organic beef, I mean, all those things are expanding, and if you're in that vehicle, you have a chance to get some price opportunities. And then there's a big use of cover crops, and it's primarily driven by soil benefits, soil health, less soil erosion, but it's a tremendous resource that we could use for livestock feed too, and hopefully as we go through this a little bit, we'll talk some about that. So other things that are specific management changes that are going on that really have logically fit to integrate with crops. One is the growth in deep bedded and pitted cattle feeding barns. Whether it's a hoop barn or a monoslope barn, those have really changed that we're handling all the manure, we're trying to capture all the nutrients, we're using all the nutrients on our farm, we're giving the cattle a better environment, we're improving feed efficiency and rate of gain, and so those have been driven a lot by people who have row crops to use the manure. And a lot of times, at least at this point, people already have cattle, but potentially it could be people that really don't have cattle and just want to get into the cattle business. So that could be something that could be growing, or partnerships between people with the buildings and people with the farmland, things like that. And then this kind of just looks at a chart that's from our feedlot manual that the Beef Center staff put together recently, and we use it for meetings, and shows you that kind of, and this is just, again, our budget, our estimates. You need to use your own numbers. But how much manure we think we produce in an open lot, a deep bedded lot, and a deep pit, and how much the total value of that would be based on kind of some current prices of nutrients, and then also then the net per year once you pay for the hauling. And that's, again, you know, variable. I mean, people have different cost structures on what they think it costs to haul it, all that stuff. But that gives you an idea that there's part of the reason people can pay for the barns is the manure value. There's no question about that. That's one of the things that makes it possible. And swine finishing units, and you know, the Steenhooks will talk a little bit about their building here in a little while, but it's a way to add income for farm operation, and somebody else is the one that owns them, hopefully takes most of the market risk. You know, you have a contract, and then you just evaluate the contract and whether it's good enough. But one of the reasons why the contract can work is you can utilize the manure for crop nutrients. So hopefully you're getting paid. It's really been used a lot in Iowa and all the way through the Midwest to give people an opportunity to replace some off-farm income with something that they can do on the farm and raise a nutrient that will help their operation. So that's really, you know, we can find lots of examples that are very similar to Duane and Jodi, that two people can be at home at the farm because they've added something like that to generate income and maybe replace something that was off-farm job. And that's happens all over the country. And then certainly that can not necessarily all be deep pitted, but that's typically what it is. But there also are certain markets like other pork niche markets and other networks that would ask for those pigs to be raised in a hoop barn, and that also could be an opportunity if that's the structure you want to be in. Then we have cornstalk grazing, and that's very underutilized in the state, or using cornstalks for grazing or feed. And you know, really, I think you talk to people, and I talk to a lot of people, and I'll have a lot of people say cornstalks are worthless now. I can't use them. And you'll have somebody else that grazes them extensively every year, manages it well, probably reduces their feed costs, maybe even $100 a cow by using things like that. And so we've got both extremes. So people believe what they want to believe to a certain extent, but definitely cornstalks are different than they were at one time, because now corn doesn't fall down as much as it did one time because it's got different genetics, stronger stalks, there's less grain on the ground. So it's a different feed. The thing to always keep in mind is they only eat pretty much husks and leaves when they graze and what little grain there's there. They do not eat much stalk. The stalk's the part that doesn't have much value. So if you can graze it and meter out a little bit at a time, they'll get a lot of good out of it. There's a really good publication available from Nebraska on crop residues that would be helpful for you. It's also important not to try to graze animals on stalks that need more nutrition than is on stalks. I mean, corn stalks are not going to be real high nutritionally, but they're good enough for a cow that's dry in the middle of pregnancy. Or if you're going to graze cows and calves out there, you need to supplement them more. I mean, it's more management involved depending on how you use the stalks. It's also very important in our environment to use the corn stalks first when they're higher value, and then graze stockpile later if you have that available, because the grasses will hold their nutritional value much later. And then, you know, a basic 180 bushel corn should have about almost 3,000 pounds of husk and leaves. So that's a lot of feed resource. And some people will harvest that and grab some stalks along with it and then haul that to the farm and use it for bedding or use it for feed. But also the cattle can graze part of this. But you need cooperation between crop farmers and livestock owner. And a lot of crop farmers just will insist that you cannot graze those stalks because of problems they'll have on the subsequent yield. And also a lot of people want to do fall tillage. They want to use fall nitrogen applications. So when they do that, it's very difficult to graze. But if you had more cooperation between a crop farmer and livestock owner, then it gives you opportunities. And there's research in Illinois, Nebraska, Iowa that all shows that if you manage grazing corn stalks right, you do not have to reduce the subsequent yield. And so, you know, I think we know that we can do it. And if you are going to harvest it off as bales, then you need to replace those nutrients. So somebody has to either haul all the manure right back to the same place, or use some places where you go ahead and use some other nutrients. And then the other thing is cover crops. Cover crops would be an opportunity to graze. I think we've got a lot of problems in Iowa based on the fact that we have a very short window to do this. We're trying to fly it on. We're trying to use high boys to put it on, but we still don't harvest the crop until about October usually. and so it's very difficult to get a lot of growth. We can't compare what we can do with that to somebody that's following wheat because we don't have the same growing conditions. But after corn silage, it's kind of a no-brainer to do it, and I think most people have done it and have done it for very many years. But we need to balance the agronomy and livestock nutrition goals. So in other words, maybe there's a certain termination date that's best for the row crop. That might not be the best termination date for feed quality. You need to balance that if you're going to try to do both. And then you're going to get most of the yield in this state with cereal grains in the spring. I mean, very seldom are you going to get a lot of production in the fall with overwintering cereal grains. Not that you can't, but in a lot of years it just doesn't work because we don't have enough time. And then insurance and soil and agronomy and livestock all interact with what's the optimum time to plant it and harvest it and what to do with it. So we have people that do a range of, harvesting it as silage, harvesting it as hay, grazing it, and I think good opportunities to use that because this feed that's there, it could be good quality feed. It just needs to be fit in with the agronomy. Then the other thing in our area is we got a lot of people looking at different models of how to do cow-calf production too. And that includes extended grazing, and that would be using a combination maybe of cornstalks and stockpile grazing. We have producers that actually graze almost year-round. Our traditional program, which would be about graze about half the year and then feed them with stored feed half the year, and that typically has been hay. Limited grazing or Drylot confinement, and then that's growing amazingly fast. With people who want to have cows and really don't think they can access pasture, and they're looking at building a barn and shutting them up, or in Nebraska looking at using existing feedlots, placing them, shutting them up part of the year. And then we actually have a new project that's a 3-year Leopold funded project that Steenhoek's actually be part of too, that is trying to look at the differences between what makes these 3 different systems successful, what can help make them successful. And then it's called sustainably growing beef herds, evaluating systems that provide economic opportunities for protecting soil and water. And they're going to look at both the limited grazing, the traditional, and the extended grazing. And we're going to collect a lot of information over the period of 3 years. So we hope at the end of this that we can come up with a production manual for cow-calf producers that want to look at all 3 of these strategies. And our combination of the strategies, because I think you're going to find people that are going to maybe dry lot them some more because they're limited on pasture. They're still going to want to maximize the pasture they use. So it's going to be a combination. It's not going to be just either or. And we've improved it very much. Yes.
Excuse me, this is Warren. I have a question, or maybe you can elaborate on this a bit more. You've mentioned that the limited grazing, or grazing in barns, or the deep pitted grazing is growing quite a bit in Iowa. Do you have any statistics as to numbers of animals out of the total population that are in these kinds of systems already?
No, we really don't. I mean, I think we just know of cases of people doing it. I don't know that there's really any vehicle like with the Census to collect how. Well, obviously we know pasture acres, and we know pasture acres are lower. We also know the cows haven't decreased as fast, so I think we kind of anticipate that means they're feeding them more. But we don't have it other than just with word of mouth and us actually knowing individuals that are doing it. It'd be nice to know how many people are doing it. And that might be something that we can come up with some way in the future. This project, at least, we're kind of boring into more what are the differences between these and what can make each one of them be successful.
Okay,
but I have no idea what percentage it is. It's certainly not a high percentage, but it's certainly growing.
Okay, thanks.
That makes sense?
Sure, thank you.
You bet. So our cows can graze high quality stockpile in Iowa. We have also, one of our producer models on this is extended grazing, and we'll have cooperators who are really trying to strive to not feed any hay. That's what they'd like to do. And so it can be really high quality, and they also can really graze late in the year. And so we've got some guys that very seldom feed hay and get along, and so that's different because you have a little more land, because you have to have more pasture base, but also you have a little different labor mix, and you also are buying a lot of outside inputs. So that's one model. Typically, what most people have done has been a combination of feeding hay and grazing. This is actually some of Sellers Brothers yearling heifers that I thought they might get out if I didn't feed them some hay, so fed them hay to go along with their grass. Might not have been the perfect mix, but and then another reason I might feed a little hay to cows like that would be dilute my fescue. So I'm trying to give them something else to eat besides fescue. So this is typical what we've done, and this all around the Midwest is harvest hay, feed it to them, let them graze part of the year, and then eventually give up on that and feed them hay. And this is very important to look at feed waste reduction, trying to reduce the amount of feed we can feed as much. Over the years, feed costs have been anywhere from 50 to 70% of the total cost of a cow-calf production system. You know, now it's probably more in the 50s because everything else is so doggone expensive, but it's really always been a big part. So a combination of grass and forage we feed has to be a big part of what we're doing. And then the extended to calving and rearing calves inside is growing, and it's another set of problems. I mean, you've got to vet them, you've got to make sure you have good sanitation, you can be concerned about possibly getting some health problems, but there definitely are people in Iowa, because of the price of pasture land, that are convinced they're better off to do this than to actually try to pursue pasture land. And then, you know, it would be important to really have a good environment for both the calves and the cows, and so we're going to have an even better environment for the calves. We have a place for them to escape and maybe even eat creek feed, do a little better. We're probably going to wean these calves earlier than some other people might wean their calves. Nebraska then is in the middle of a long-term study looking at Drylot with the same kind of goal, to feed them. They have limited pasture. They have excess feedlot capacity, so they have places they can put them in Drylot. And I think they're finding that the thing that works the best probably is a combination of some Drylot and some grazing. So graze cornstalks, maybe, you know, and graze other things. You know, try not to have the cattle shut up all the time. And that's something you can certainly look at the University of Nebraska's beef research reports. Another thing that makes a difference on getting more cattle production probably is just value-added markets. We have everybody's talking about sustainable beef. A lot of suppliers, a lot of meat retailers want to look at sustainable beef, and they're going to be defining that. And there's groups of industry leaders trying to help define that, and that's going to include animal handling, feeding, and also land use is going to be part of it. So those will probably not necessarily open up new markets. That hopefully that's just going to protect your market, because I think it's like a lot of things. They're going to expect that from everybody at some point. So at some point you need to be in there. Also, there's a lot of growth in natural or never ever 3, no implants, no antibiotics, no ionophores. It's a growing market. Export drives part of that. And you have to have not only a good market for those animals that qualify, but also a market for the animals that you do have to treat, because, you know, any of these programs would ask you to treat an animal that's ill and then identify it so it doesn't get in the supply chain. That's an important part of it. And then high quality and branded programs. By high quality in this, I mean high quality grade mostly, and that has increased 400% since 2003. And the value of that meat is about $4 billion. And that obviously is all grain fed. This is stuff that we're talking about that's fed concentrate, at least part of the phase, to be able to reach that grade. So it's certified Angus beef, non-black time of things that are also average choice, and even other animals are identified as a certain breed that fit into it as a branded program. And that is growing very fast. And then the other thing that's growing certainly is more markets that are accessing certain consumer demands like organic and grass-fed, and are also direct to consumers. And probably the combination of organic, grass-fed, and natural is probably about 5% of the U.S. market from numbers you see. And that's not so important. I mean, we realize it's growing. We know there's more. It's just still a smaller part. But the demand is growing, and it's also expanding into some traditional wholesale and retail markets that maybe it wouldn't have been into. And so it's really important to have good, consistent quality as they get into those different markets. And then it's also really important that all these things are going to have a cost to you to do it. It's a different kind of production system. You need to be sure that you have at least a realistic access to a premium that's going to pay for your changes. And that's one of the problems sometimes. And also you need to have a different idea of the plan A is this high market that might be direct to consumer. Plan B might be a supply chain that uses my same production standards, is also a higher market. But then plan C still needs to be able to sell them somewhere. And so it needs to be an animal that will qualify for another market if plan A and plan B don't pan out. And that's the reality of raising cattle or any animal. You need to be able to make sure you can sell it. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Duane and Jodi, and they're going to talk about their slides. And I guess if you want to just tell me when to advance them, I will, I guess, if you want to. So once you guys talk, I've known them both for, I don't even know how many years, but I know Duane worked in some lending here in Southern Iowa. He worked for some agribusinesses in selling feed and working in other agribusiness. And then Jodi, of course, has been a teacher and also has worked in the past as and her kids have been involved in the events that I've been involved in and stuff. Their kids have been part of our youth programs here and stuff. So turn it over to you guys to visit a little bit here. So talk about
hang on just a second. Joe, there's a question in before the Steenhooks take over.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, or a comment, I guess, from Gene Schreifer. As grass-fed takes hold as a percent of the consumer's dollar, it attracts larger corporate interest JBS, largest beef processor in the world, has purchased Grass Run Farm in Iowa. As grass-fed grows, it will likely attract lower-cost grass-fed from overseas.
Yeah, that is a comment more, but I agree. I mean, I think it's just a matter if you look at other things. A good example would be natural. It's never ever 3. At one time, that was kind of driven by a smaller group of people that maybe had more control of their own supply chain. And as demand grew on that, then the major cattle harvesters drove that. So that, and they're driving that. They're driving organic, and they're probably going to drive the grass-fed to a certain extent. And I think there's probably no question that there might be more imported beef that's sold in the country that's grass-fed than U.S. domestically raised beef that's grass-fed. But a lot of that stuff that's imported is only imported to use in trimmings and used for hamburgers, not necessarily in the whole system. So no doubt that as these bigger packers get involved, they're going to drive it more. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to these guys, and they can tell me when they want to go on to the next slide. But
I'm Duane. My wife Jodi and I am a 6th-generation farmer in the state of Iowa. We farm in the northwest part of Lucas County. As you can see from the slide, I have a 20-year-old son, Sawyer, a 17-year-old daughter, Sydney, and a 14-year-old daughter, Blair. Everyone in our family is highly involved in farming operation. My daughters as well as my son, everybody runs equipment, everybody helps work the cattle. When we work stuff through the chute, everybody has specific jobs. My daughter Sydney runs the head gate. My daughter Blair runs the scissor and does the pouring. You know, I do most of the stuff at the head gate, and my wife and my son bring the cattle. So when we it's truly a family operation at our house.
They all have to help with pig chores too. They don't like that so much.
We run a total of around 425 cow-calf pairs. Half of those are on our home farm, and half of them are with a widow who lives 2 miles down the road from us. Her husband was killed about 8 years ago in a horse accident, and we were fortunate enough, and she wanted to continue with her farm and not sell it and not sell their cows, and so we are in partnership with her on about half of those 425 cows. That's why if you see in the next one, it says that we finish about half our calves. We actually finish all our calves that are home raised on our home farm, and we sell the calves that are raised on her farm as feeder cattle. They're weaned somewhere in the 1st of October range and then back grounded until somewhere in February and sold at the local auction markets. We also purchase some steers to go with our own to feed out. As you can see, we about 600 acres of hay. We actually do some different things. This year we chop some haylage. We're looking at doing some tube wrapping of hay. And we also chop about 700 tons of corn silage a year, which after that's chopped off, then we apply some manure to that ground. And then put, this year we've been working with Joe on some different options as far as cover crops. In the past we've done rye. Presents some troubles in the spring as far as getting that crop terminated on time and doing some of that kind of stuff. So we're actually looking at something like a millet and a field pea type combination, something that we can get a root mass to help hold the dirt, possibly get some fall grazing out of yet, but still don't have to worry so much about the termination in the spring. We also custom feed for a family operation out of southern Minnesota. We are a gilt acclimation or gilt feeding barn. So we supply the breeding gilts for a family operation in Minnesota that runs about 45,000 sows total. We've been very fortunate in our diversity. So if one thing works, if the others are not, we've been very lucky that way. Anything to add?
The only thing I said about this sign was this looks like they know how to use clip ties and baling wire, doing almost anything. And that's an important part of my thing. Now, Warren added earlier, where's the duct tape? You know, but I'm sure we've got duct tape involved too, probably. So we all know how to use a lot of different things, don't we? And this is kind of a little bit on the background, and you guys want to talk a little bit about how you got started in the farming down here, how you ended up where you're at. Jodi, you want to?
Yeah, I can start. I had a degree in elementary education from Iowa State. Taught elementary school 6th graders for about 14 years. Took some years off here and there when I had the kids, as Duane and I switched back and forth between who was on the farm and who was not. There were a lot of years we both spent working off the farm and farming in the dark every night. So we kind of went through those phases, and it was just recently, 5 years ago, that we had expanded to a point where we were going to need some extra help on the farm, and instead of hiring someone else to come in and do that, I resigned from my job and have been at home farming ever since then.
I guess my degree is from Iowa State University. A little bit of the background on that is I am a farm crisis kid, you might say. When I came off, we actually lost our farm in '87 initially from the farm crisis, and really wanted nothing to do with the farm when I came off of it. Went to a different school. Agriculture just is part of me, I guess. It called me back. I ended up at Iowa State and got an Ag Studies degree. We actually moved onto the farm that we are with the help of my my dad and my mom, and my older brother helped us to purchase the farm we're on now. We will, on December 10th, we will have been there 21 years. We've been able to grow it steadily and continue to add to our balance sheet and being conservative. And like Jodi said, we've both worked off the farm several times. We continue to try to innovate with Joe's help and with other industry people, consultants. We've continued to try to innovate, and we built we have a hoop building that is 40 by 210, trying to utilize the improved genetics that we are trying to buy. We try to buy good bulls and good cattle, and we want to have, our goal is to have one of the top herds in Iowa, if not the United States, as far as production. That is our ultimate goal. So we felt if we were going to spend the money on the genetics and on the improving that, then we needed to take those cattle all the way to market to be able to capitalize on that. Another advantage we have found is the manure. The manure is no longer, for many years, was viewed as a byproduct or what I want to say, a hassle, or just something to be discarded. We use it as an asset. If my banker would let me, I would put it on my balance sheet as an asset, because we view it as being able to improve the productivity of our farm, and being able to, and the hog buildings have of course added diversity and income, but also have added productivity to our operation. We have, when we moved on the farm 21 years ago, typical for southern Iowa pasture is, you know, we were probably over 3 acres to a cow-calf pair to get through the summer. And currently, with the application of the manure and liming the pastures to follow that, and rotationally grazing, you know, we're somewhere in that 1.2 to 1.25 acres per cow-calf pair, and still have, and this year, fortunately, with the moisture we've had, we still have an abundance of pasture to carry us well into the fall.
Well, those pictures are where they just recently rotated into, I think last week we just moved them into that pasture. You know, we rotate between, there's six different pastures on that south side of the highway there, and you know, it's really a nice way to utilize the grass better and let the other areas recover.
The rotational grazing, the paddocks, also allows us in a year like this where the manure has accelerated the growth of those pastures. If we have a paddock that has just so far outgrown what the cows, the waste will be really high, then we'll go in and take a cutting of hay off of that paddock before we rotate cows into it. This year we took off of brome pasture. There was several paddocks. We took 4.5 and 5 round bales of hay per acre off of those, and then rotate cows back in and still have plenty of feed. I think one of the biggest advantages to our system, and what we found the manure to be, is just how much it improves the productivity. As you can see on the slide here, we have a field sits right behind our hog building, sits right next to our cattle building, that's been in corn 17 years in a row now. And when we started that, that field, the corn was pathetic. And as you can see on the slide last year, when we chopped that, we planted that in 15-inch rows at about 32,000 plants per acre. And you can see that when the insurance came and took the assessment of it, that it was, he called it 198 bushel the acre. And then when we got done measuring the pit silo, it yielded 23.5 tons of silage per acre. And then plus we're able to go back and put a cover crop back on that ground after we apply some more manure, and also able to get 3 to 4 weeks worth of grazing then off of that same ground. So the productivity per acre is been significant. One of the added, I think, benefits to what our system does, and it fits well in with the watershed management, is, and somebody I'm sure smarter than me maybe has the exact figures, but I think the figure somewhere is for every 1/10% of organic matter you add to your soil, that soil is going to hold somewhere around an extra 100,000 gallons of water. And typically, it hasn't been the case this year, but typically in southern Iowa, water in late July and August is a premium for us. So anytime I can have an extra 100,000 gallons of water in my soil, it increases my grazing by maybe 2 weeks or 2.5 weeks, and my productivity. And if you carry that farther, if you can imagine taking every acre of pasture in southern Iowa and increasing the organic matter that way, can you imagine how much more absorption and slowing of the water that we could do in the watershed by holding that water where it's falling rather than having it flow? The next slide is talking about our application of our hog manure on our pastures. We use a product called More Than Manure to help stabilize the nitrogen and the phosphorus. We pump our building in the spring, typically somewhere around the first week of April is when it kind of fits in usually. I mean, depending on the weather and the rain and everything like that. This year it was the first week of April when we emptied it. It goes out on pasture with flow meter set at 2,500 gallons per acre. We have found that the stabilization product seems to have really helped in the response with the grass and how it grows.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. I mean, you've got some good, really nutrients are lacking in our area, especially subsoil P. So I mean, anything you can do to build that up, and that's why all this manure can be a big benefit. Plus, grazing the cattle more effectively too, and getting better manure distribution. So both of them are probably important for you to get more production, for sure. And then you get more diversity.
Duane and Jodi.
Yes.
Hey guys, can I ask a question? Could you talk a little bit about how you use the rotational grazing in combination with the the deep bedded system, and are they different classes of cattle, same class of cattle? How do you manage that?
Our pasture rotation is with our cow-calf pairs in this, that were born in this spring, and then we rotate them through the pasture. Our hoop building is for our calves from the previous year that we are finishing out to be fats. So we are not housing our cow herd inside. That's specifically for the finishing of our previous year's calves.
Okay, great, thank you.
So this is kind of a slide, I think it's a pasture that probably you hadn't been in or something, you know, probably that in plum plates got the response on the manure with a lot of growth.
Right.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. So I think, you know, you can see that I think there's other benefits beyond just livestock, even by getting more grass growth and more cover, probably more plant diversity, more legumes, you know, maybe even more other things. And I think, I don't know about your farm, but I'm seeing some changes even in some wildlife a little bit. I've actually seen some quail on my farm, which I haven't for years.
Yes, we have to.
So I think, you know, getting a little bit more management with more growth and more edging that gives you more opportunity for those wildlife is a big plus too. Not that I'm interrupting what you're saying, but
no, that's fine.
And then the cover crops, you know, talk a little bit about what you'd like to do with those cover crops if you could do it. Just get more production and help the soil both.
Well, I think it's important to, I mean, when we chop that in, you know, this year, corn was planted on April 15th, so we're probably looking at, we're going to be chopping that ground. We're going to be chopping that corn silage here before the end of August. So to leave that ground, if we would leave that ground bare, that entire fall season, you risk, you know, erosion and wind and all those kind of, and I think we miss an opportunity to have some productivity of the ground. So I think it's important then to get right after we try to apply some manure to that ground right after the corn silage comes off, and then like I said earlier, then we're going to try something different this year. We're actually thinking about no-tilling some millet and some field peas maybe this year to try something different. So you know, we're open. We in the past have tried to fly on some cover crops. We have not had much success with that in our area. I don't know if that's our type of our ground or if it was just the year or what it is, but we did not have much success with the flying on cover crops. So we're gonna try to no-till with a Great Plains drill right into where we're chopping off of, and we're gonna hope that we can get a good response out of. We're actually gonna try some pearl millet and see if we can get that root mass and get that cover to get that ground stabilized.
Okay, there's a comment in from Gene Schreifer again. Forage oats plus brassica both grow strong into fall and will die over the winter, at least in Wisconsin. And then Kent Solberg has a question. How many days per year do you typically feed the cow herd hay/supplement?
Depending on the weather we have, I mean, you know, 3 years ago with the horrible drought, we, you know, weaned the calves the 1st of September and then, you know, had to start feeding hay the 1st of October. Typically, we would love to have stuff out grazing cornstalks and some stockpiled fescue that we have. We'd really like to have that till Thanksgiving or the 1st of December even, and then start feeding from there. But you know, it's really just depends on the weather and what is available to us there.
I believe last year was the year we grazed through mid-December on just because we didn't have the snow cover that we typically get, so we could hold off on the haying quite a while.
And these guys are a good example of kind of that middle group. I think they have times where they're getting into more extended grazing. But on the thing we talked about with our project, I mean, they're going to have a combination of stored feed they produce on the farm, probably co-products they buy for the cows, and also grazing.
Right.
And everybody wants to graze more, but I mean, we work with the resource we got.
Right.
Oh, and to a comment to the gentleman that was using the brassica, we've tried some of that in our area, and like I said, I don't know if it's our soils with the really tight clay. I really don't know. We just can't seem to get much success with that in our area. I mean, we've got myself, and then I've got several peers, you know, that we've all tried it, and we really haven't had what you could call an economic success on that side of things with that mix.
And one thing yesterday at a meeting I was at, Sarah Carlson was talking a little bit about combination of cover crops, and we've talked a little bit about maybe assuming that if we don't have enough time to get all the benefits we could from turnips or radishes, then maybe using rape or something like that that'll produce more forage, and not assume that we're not going to get the root mass. So in our area, Iowa, especially when he chops corn solids, he's got a lot of options to do something with a longer growing season. But when you're flying it on here and it's not following wheat, you know, we have a lot different situation than like North Dakota or something like that. So we definitely are learning more all the time. We know rye works, how it works, but we're learning more about everything else and what we want to do to get more. And then I think you're right, growing something like even oats and a combination or something, or like they're talking about the summer annual, trying not to have work over winter. That's one of the advantages for not having to worry about termination as much. So are you trying to get a lot of spring growth, or are you trying to get more terminate, or making sure you get termination so you don't have spring growth? And that's one of the trade-offs here, I think, because typically most of our production is in the spring with rye or triticale or wheat. Mm-hmm. So if we use those, we almost got to assume we're going to use it in the spring if feed's our goal.
Kent had another question. Was that aerial seeding or drilling in after silage harvest? And I believe that's referring to the attempt at brassicas.
Yeah, I think these guys, I mean, I think in our mind, our experience here in Iowa has been that after the corn silage, the advantage if you could get it put on aerially, you take the corn silage out early enough. So maybe it would work if it was applied a different way. But especially with the cereal grains, we have a little better luck with drilling it just because you get more tillering and it's really more productive if it's drilled. So that's why historically we've done more drilling. But, you know, and I think there's people trying it all over the state. There's going to be a lot of different combinations. The only issue here is just, not that you can't fly it on and it works, it just doesn't work all the time. You know, rye is almost foolproof if you drill it to have something in the spring, if you want something in the spring. So that's one of the issues. You know, I think everybody's learning. Everybody, if you go to meetings, 10 different people have 10 different opinions on what's the best mix, you know. So I think there's a lot of different options, definitely, that's for sure. And a lot of it is whether you're going to graze it or harvest it, because sometimes we want the option of both if we're going to be rye. And so if we get in the situation we can't graze in the spring, then we want to chop it, then we know it's a pretty good feed. Some of the other things may not work as good for that.
Well, in that year we did rye. We had it available in the spring, and it was quite healthy, so we tried to graze it before crop time, but then you have cattle out on the ground when it's muddy and wet, and they track it all up. And then, you know, we like to do no-till practices, which you basically have to till that up after the cows have made a mess of it. So it's just been a challenge for us.
Yeah, I think every situation will be different on this, and every farm will be different. You know, and certainly that's right. You know, I told these guys before, when I had a lot of sheep, we always put in rye after the silage, and we got along really great grazing sheep on rye. That was an awesome thing for us, even in the fall, a lot of times. But it's a little different grazing the sheep than cattle, you know, and it's different combination. So here's another picture of the family. One thing I wanted to do here maybe is have a little dialogue just between the three of us here before we get some more questions probably. But I had 4 questions I wanted to ask you guys, and you could kind of both comment on. So what's your biggest challenge? I mean, I know there's lots of challenges. What do you think your biggest challenge you're facing? What do you think is a really big challenge you're facing?
For me, it's the amount of time that we spend, you know, working all the time. We don't seem to have a lot of time to get away. I mean, it's something you gotta love to do, and you do it. But sometimes it's challenging to get those things done on a timely fashion. You feel like you're behind, depending on the weather and what it's doing. Like, you know, this summer with all the rain we've had, trying to get the hay in, it's been just a frustrating challenge.
Well, I think probably, you know, one of our bigger challenges is land availability and land price. I think, you know, in our area we're 60 miles from Des Moines, or well, about 45 actually from the south side of Des Moines. So you know, recently there was 160 acres right next to us that we would have loved to have had to run cows on. Well, a group of policemen from Des Moines bought it and they've turned it into a hunting refuge. So those acres are completely gone to production, and those are the kind of challenges that face us, that that just having the availability and hopefully fits into the next one, the next question there on your, what is the dream of your farm? Well, I have a 20-year-old son who graduates from Indian Hills with a degree in diesel mechanics next Wednesday, and praise the Lord, he has a job, and he'll be moving to West Bend, Iowa, and working for Althofer Cat over there for a while. We told him he had to work off the farm for 2 or 3 years before he could think about coming back. But as we look forward, and how do I get enough acres, and how do I put together enough cows, and those kind of things to be able to bring my son, and my 17-year-old daughter is going to go to Iowa State and major in ag business. She shows interest in wanting to come back. How do I make my operation sustainable enough and big enough to be able to supply for an additional 2, maybe 3 families, and with what's on to the future?
Let me follow up a little bit on your first one too, a little bit on the guys that bought it for the recreational uses. And next time they have a webinar, I guess they're going to be talking about these conservation uses, but we have a lot of really good stuff to show. But even in that case, the first thing they all want to do is take the cows off it, and that's the worst thing they could do. They need to change how the management was with the cows on it, because certainly cattle and disturbance could be one of the ways to get the plant diversity they want for their goals. But boy, getting somebody to do that's almost impossible, because the first thing goes, the cows go, and really a combination of some prairie and some native plants and some plant diversity and fire and grazing would be a lot better for their goals, probably. Obviously you can't screw up white-tailed deer, unfortunately. But they can have more good deer attractants, though, if you had cattle grazing there. We have some good examples of clovers and things like that that are in a regular system. They really actually make their deal better with limited grazing, and fencing's a problem. So that might be something that the next time is going to lead into that, I think, when they talk about that. Another question was technology. You talked a little bit about trying to adapt to technology. So what things do you need to stay competitive, and what do you think are, both from the livestock side and the crop side, what do you think are things that are important to you?
Well, I think on the crop side of things, we need we try to plant hybrids that are specific, silage specific type hybrids that are more digestible and those kind of things. Those are all technologies that we need that we hope that seed companies continue to work on and do those things. I read an article yesterday on a gentleman, and I can't even remember where he's from, on an ear tag that's going to tell you whether you have a sick cow or a sick calf. It's going to read their temperature, and it's going to read some other things through this electronic ear tag. And I told my wife, I said, that would be something that we need to look at specifically, as busy as we are, and if it could send you an alert if you have a calf in your building that's got a temperature raising, or a cow that's got an above average body temperature, something like that. I think those are technologies, and those are things that are going to be coming in the future with what you can do today with modern technology.
And then anything else you want to say, Jodi, about
No,
that? And then also basically, so overall, I know I really hope your children can be involved, but then how do you just view the farming opportunities in our area, or even in the Midwest, with livestock and crops, and trying to look at both of those together? I think those are, how do you look for the future? You think there's good opportunities? Think there's concerns you've got there too? Or?
Well, I think there's some concerns, but I think that in our area, and I don't know how it is in the rest. We don't get around much, but in our area, we have thousands of acres of land that are gonna swap ownership in the next 10 years. We have three or four widow ladies that live within 2 miles of our house. So I think that goes back to one of the challenges. How do you leverage yourself? How do you bring in that next generation, and how do you fit those opportunities? I think, in the livestock side of things, I think the opportunities are going to be there. I know the cow herd is growing, and I know we're probably not going to see these top level prices forever, but I don't know that we're ever going to go back to the prices that we had in the 90s, when we had over 1 million cows. I'm not sure that the calf prices ever get there, because I don't think we'll ever get the cow numbers back up there. So I think there's opportunity there for the next generation in the livestock side of things in my area. The crop side of things in my area, you know, we would like to get to the point where we only crop enough to feed our livestock, because we feel the ground is, you know, it's got
Just better suited.
too much roll. It's just better suited for the cow side of things, and you know, that's the direction we would really like to go with our operation. But you know, somebody in northern Iowa or, you know, southeast Iowa, where the ground is flat, you know, I think there's going to be opportunities there, because I believe, I mean, somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the average age of the farmer in the state of Iowa is somewhere around, it's in the mid-60s. You know, so there's going to be a lot of change in the next 10 years. A lot of this ground is going to change hands, and whether it changes into the hands of a farmer or whether it changes into the hands of an investor is going to be going to shape agriculture for the future, and especially for the next generation.
That's a good point. So I think we'll keep moving along, but any more questions for Jodi and Duane right now, because obviously we'll take more questions as we go along.
There's a comment in from Kent Solberg going back to the absentee landowners. Approaching absentee landowners about conservation grazing will take a very persuasive educating of those landowners who have been indoctrinated by the conservation community that cattle are bad. This will be a process that may include inviting them to your farm for a tour and other places so they can see your intent is to work with them.
Well, yeah, that's true. One of our problems here has been that we have some really good examples of people that bought land strictly for the conservation uses and changed cattlemen because they didn't like that it was managed, but they found a cattleman that would do it the way they wanted, which is kind of limited grazing in the critical areas, getting more lagoons, and been very successful. But then there still is a problem to reach these new people and get them there. I would say in Iowa, at least, the mentality in some of our government-employed conservation workers has changed a lot. A lot of DNR wildlife biologists really see the benefits of disturbance in grazing, and a lot of other people do at county conservation boards. I would say it's like the non-government agencies that are a little more of an obstacle, you know, trying to reach them, and also trying to reach the individual landowner, because it's really a person at a time. It is impossible to. We try stuff. Even down here, we had some people try to have breakfast during turkey hunting season, and trying to get people to come out there after they did their first run of the turkey, and then go in there for a breakfast and talk about this, and you still can't get people to come. So reaching them because they are absentee and having them listen to you just a little bit is part of the issue, and it's hard to approach them. And because they've got a mentality, their view of grazing is always overgrazing. The only view of people, if they come in and buy that land, is overgrazing, and that's bad.
There's so many misconceptions.
Yeah, they don't realize how much good grazing can do.
Yeah.
So, like Duane just mentioned, the cow herd is expanding. We know that profitability is going to be tighter, but how do we keep profitable? And, you know, I think we all agree that it's a combination of a lot of different factors, but using forage better is one part of that. And also more productivity. I mean, at least the right kind of productivity for your farm. It might not be more pounds. It might be the right mix of what's the right per acre or per unit thing that's more effective for your farm. And everybody, and I think that people in our study, we're going to have, even they're getting competition between them. We haven't mentioned that to Jodi, but two of these guys are arguing about, they think they're the most profitable cow herd in Iowa, and so they're trying to prove it. So I don't know if any of us feel that way, but the point is somehow it does have to make money no matter which one of these choices you make, and all of them could. There's a lot of different ways to do things. And then, you know, a lot of impact if we had more diversity. Certainly we could decrease soil erosion. I think we could improve water quality and balance risk with more income streams. All those are important if we had more diversity. Now, I want to refer back to a study that was done by, what at that time was the National Soil Health Laboratory, and also Dr. Matt Liebman in the Agronomy Department of Iowa State. And this is all the way back from 2005. They looked at some watersheds on how more diversified crop livestock systems could affect soil erosion and leachable nitrogen at a landscape scale. So they were looking at two areas in western Iowa, kind of approaching the Less Hills, and trying to look at, you know, what were the things we could do to change it. And this is, so it's old. So if anything, these land uses we're talking about now are probably even more dramatic now. But at the time, then, you know, we're trying to compare their current conditions to alternative conditions that included more buffers, more oats and forages, more rotations, and also more permanent pasture. and increase cattle 1.5 times and hogs 8 times. So they were going to have more hog finishing and more manure and basically almost no synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. Nitrogen was almost all going to be supplied by the livestock. And then that looks at kind of land use of what they were talking about, and so those lighter colors were row crop, corn bean rotations, and then the pasture and hay was a little darker, and then non-agriculture also was darker. And then we have a 6-year rotation put back into the one on the right. So what we would talk about the corn oats, meadow, or corn oats and something like that, and trying to get more rotation with hay and pasture, and then also the permanent pasture. The kind of stuff we talked about losing all the way across the state. And then these same maps then show that if we did this, and this doesn't mean it replaced all the corn, this means it took quite a bit of the corn and converted it to a rotation and left some of it as permanent corn. So the stuff that was probably under a 2% slope or something like that, or under maybe even under a 3 or 4% slope was left in corn and soybean, but the other stuff was changed. And then what we ended up with then on a ton basis would be anywhere from about 2 tons of acre loss to 11 with the 2005 management, and we decreased that from 1/2 ton to 3 tons. So a tremendous difference in soil loss, and also the same tremendous difference then in nitrate nitrogen, soil nitrate nitrogen that would be released. So this is really directly related to some of the debate we're having about nitrogen. If we had more roots growing and had more things that had more diverse uses, we would also reduce both nitrogen and phosphorus delivery to our streams as well. And this was a huge difference is what they projected. And these were models that were, like I say, 10 years old. And my understanding is that the National Center for Agriculture and Environment has much more powerful models now that could look at this. So something, you know, if you're working on watershed projects in the Midwest, certainly something to look at is how could we make land use changes. You know, Jodi and Duane live in the Whitebreast watershed, which is one that goes into the Red Rock Lake and it goes into the Mississippi River. I live in the Sheridan River watershed. It goes to the Rathman Lake and Missouri River. And essentially all the watershed projects we have in the past, we've had very much difficulty getting people to do the BMPs that relate to grazing. We've had much better luck getting to put in terraces or wetlands or impoundment structures. And that's one of the issues we got here is finding farmers that are willing to do some of these basic land use changes that could be very effective. And that could be things like more rotation or more strip farming, you know, more rotational grazing, more permanent pasture, and even pasture in critical areas or forages in critical areas. And that is the thing that we have a hard time selling here. I don't know if you guys want to comment on that, but I mean, not every farmer wants livestock. Not every farmer is willing to do it.
Right.
Somehow we need more partnership with people.
Mm-hmm.
Duane, you think? Or
well, we need, and then there needs to be, Joe touched on it earlier as far as why did our rotational cropable pasture go away. You know, we need some support that way that, you know, it's a lot easier for somebody to come in and insure a corn or a bean crop than it is, and they're putting a floor under their income versus taking the risk of having a cow and a calf out there, and you know, if you get a snowstorm overnight and you lose that calf, you've lost that income with no insurance, you know, floor underneath that. So I think, you know, that's one of the paradigms that needs to shift a little bit in this deal is somehow you need to make it so that it's a little more attractive for that permanent pasture and that cow and those kind of things also.
And that's why you've had a unique opportunity with your neighbor of wanting to keep the cows and really wanting to do it and being interested in working with you and hopefully finding it something that's beneficial to both of you and hopefully continue to adapt that as you need to make it beneficial to both of you. And that doesn't happen often enough. And one thing we've certainly talked a lot about is I get calls all the time with people wanting to take care of cows for people or really wanting to change some of the, I even had some calls from Southwest Iowa wanting to put some land that he's farming now back into pasture, but he's trying to find people to help place the cows because he can't really do it all. And so really finding a way to get that network put together, and I think that's something we're very interested in trying to find more opportunities for young people to be the cattle caretakers in a system like that to get them involved. Somehow we have to get more partnerships between people. And that's one of our challenge, I think, is getting enough partnerships between people, I believe, to do that. Now, Warren, did you want me to go to those next slides about your upcoming thing, or did you want to take over and talk about the next webinar, or do you want me to take more questions here first, or what would you like to do?
I would Thank you, Joe, and Jodi and Duane. It's been very, very insightful, and I've got a couple of questions. There may be other people in the audience that do, and I want to make a comment. So let me make the comment first. You're absolutely right about partnerships. Allison put up a note that the Pasture project has been fairly successful in working with land trust. It's kind of the intermediary with conservationists or absentee landowners, non-operating landowners, and as a conservation community, and Joe, you pointed this out, is seeing the benefit of disturbance and grazing, that they're carrying the message to a lot of landowners, and so that's the bridge, so to speak, that we've been using, and we've also been doing some teaming and some partnering. The grazing broker concept with Southwest Badger in Southwest Iowa has done is exactly what you're talking about, Joe, is this bridge between landowners who want cattle and existing cattlemen and young people who could be there to put cattle on the land and to tend the cattle. Duane and Jodi, I had a question about your soil productivity. You mentioned the increases in soil organic matter. Have you done any soil testing over time? Do you have anything to kind of track the changes in productivity and the increases in soil organic matter?
We have done some of that. We're actually part of the, Joe mentioned that new research study that we're starting in on, and next Friday we're actually, Iowa State University is coming down and we're going to start an extensive tracking program on that. But in the past it has just been, I try to soil sample every other year or so, and do some of that kind of thing, try to keep track of my pHs and those kind of things. So I really don't have what you call a graft growth type thing. It's just more of my management, but we're hoping with the new research project through Iowa State now that that's going to become a graphable type data system.
Any idea of kind of where you started 17 years ago in organic matter and where you are now?
I'd have to get, I doubt I can even find those soil samples from way back then, but I can tell you that we were really, really poor. The ground was really, really poor. We bought the farm from an older gentleman, and the farm had probably not seen a fertilizer cart in 20 years before we bought it. So all I could tell you was that the condition of the soil was very, very poor.
There's a comment here from...
your yields on...
Oh, go ahead, Warren.
No, I was just going to say that, just looking at your yields, if you started at 75 bushel the acre corn and you're now nearly 200, I mean, you're obviously doing something very right. So.
And some of that might be technology other ways too, because I'm sure the genetics are a little better on the corn too, but you got to take at least some of the credit from her for nutrients. Maybe not all.
That's right. At least some of the credit. Go ahead, Jane.
Okay, there's another comment here from Kent Solberg. Without livestock, and this goes back to, I think, Jodi's comment about feeling like there's never enough time to get everything done. Without livestock, farmers get their summers off. As one corn and bean producer in Minnesota was honest enough to admit, they really enjoyed their summers off and were not willing to give them up.
Or at least the winters, because I mean these guys are out here working when it's 20 below feeding cows. So, it's a different mindset, and that may be again back to this whole thing, this combination between people that want to do it and people that don't want to do it, but a financial benefit for both. Because not everybody is going to want to raise cattle or pigs. I mean, not everybody's going to want to do it.
I mean, my background comes from. We were livestock producers from. I mean, some of my fondest memories as a young kid is letting sows in and out with my grandfather, and so the livestock side of things has been ingrained in me from a little kid, and so that's what I would rather I don't know how guys sit in a tractor for a month at a time in the spring and the fall, because sitting in a tractor is not my thing. My livestock and my cows and my pigs, that's what I love.
And luckily you married a girl that does too. That was a good thing. You were a lucky man.
Yes, I am. I'm very lucky.
Do you have other questions out there then, Warren? Or?
I'm not seeing any right now, Joe. Why don't you continue on with your wrap up?
We're done with our presentation, and I guess what you may want to do is talk about your upcoming events, right? And
correct. Thank you. So again, thanks to all three of you, Duane and Jodi and Joe, for your presentation. It was just great, and I think I thank the audience for all of their questions. The next webinar is September 11th. As I mentioned, it's going to be grazing for the conservation and soil health benefit. Right now we've got a couple of panelists in mind who have volunteered to do that. Laura Payne, who's with the Wisconsin Dairy Apprenticeship Program, and Terry Vanderpool, who's also they're both grazers. Terry is with the Land Stewardship Project in Minnesota, so I'm sure they'll have a great presentation. Again, I'm not seeing any further questions from our audience. I want to thank everybody for being here as a part of this. Again, there'll be a short survey when you log off of the webinar, and we certainly would appreciate you taking that survey. Jane or Jeff, any last thoughts or comments?
There is one final comment from Caroline Van Schaik. Convincing, grounded presentation. Thank you, Joe, Jodi, and Duane.
Well, thank you. We enjoyed doing it, I think. You guys have fun.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having us.
So thanks to Jeff for the technology actually working. That was the part I was the most nervous about.
No problem.
Yeah.
Okay, so with that, we'll end the webinar. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was fun.